As you settle into the calming embrace of night, let your mind wander to the enchanted realm of Eldenwood, where ancient trees whisper and silver streams sing. In this frozen kingdom, a brave young boy named Finn yearns to break the chilling curse that has silenced warmth and laughter. Join Finn on his courageous journey to find a magical flame capable of melting the witch's icy heart. As you close your eyes, allow the gentle rhythm of his adventure to lull you into peaceful slumber. Sweet dreams await as hope and warmth fill the night. In the realm of Eldenwood, where ancient trees whispered secrets to the wind and silver streams sang lullabies to the moon, winter's icy grip had long taken hold. Once a land of vibrant colours and warm laughter, it now lay cloaked in a shroud of frost, every blade of grass encased in crystal, every flower turned to ice. The sun, a distant memory, seemed to shy away, allowing the chilling shadows of despair to stretch across the kingdom like a dark omen. In the heart of this frozen domain stood the village of Eldenwood, its cottages adorned with glistening icicles that hung like tears from the eaves. The villagers, though resilient, wore expressions etched with worry and dread. They spoke in hushed tones of a witch named Elara, a figure woven into the fabric of their fears, whose heart, it was said, was made of ice. With a flick of her wrist, she could summon blizzards and freeze rivers, all to enforce her will upon the land. It was in this somber setting that a young boy named Finn lived, his spirit as unyielding as the frost around him. Finn had always been different. His heart burned with a fierce desire for adventure, a spark that defied the cold. While others bundled themselves in layers of wool, he would often gaze out at the horizon, dreaming of a world unbound by frost. His unruly hair was the colour of autumn leaves, and his eyes, bright as the spring sky, sparkled with unquenchable curiosity. He longed for the warmth of sunlight on his skin and the vibrant hues of a blooming garden. One fateful evening, as the last light of day faded and the chill deepened, Finn climbed to the highest hill overlooking Eldenwood. There, he could see the jagged peaks of the frozen mountains piercing the twilight sky like icy teeth. The sight stirred something deep within him, a yearning that grew stronger with every passing moment. The villagers often spoke of the stories passed down through generations, tales of heroes and magic, of brave souls who had dared to challenge the darkness. His heart raced at the thought of adventure, but fear tugged at the edges of his mind. Could anyone truly stand against Elara? The whispers of the villagers echoed in his thoughts, warning of her wrath, her chilling laughter that danced like the wind through the trees. Yet, as he watched the first stars pierce the darkening sky, a flicker of hope ignited in his heart. He had to believe that there was a way to restore warmth and light to his home. Determined, Finn descended the hill and made his way to the village square. There, under the flickering glow of lanterns, the villagers gathered, their faces drawn and weary. They spoke of Ilara's latest threat, a deep freeze that would blanket the land in perpetual winter, unless their greatest fear was satisfied. But what could that fear be? Finn pushed through the crowd, seeking the elder of the village, a wise woman named Agatha, whose knowledge was said to stretch back to the dawn of time. Finding her near the flickering hearth, Finn's heart raced as he approached. "Elder Agatha, please," he pleaded, his voice barely rising above the crackling flames. "Tell me about Ilara. There must be a way to stop her." Agatha looked at him, her eyes dark and knowing. "Ah, young Finn, your heart burns bright with courage, but the path you seek is fraught with danger. Ilara is not merely a witch. She is a force of nature, a reflection of her own sorrow. Her heart is made of ice, you see, and until it melts, she will not relent." "But there must be a way," Finn insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. "I cannot sit idle while our kingdom withers away." With a heavy sigh, Agatha gestured for Finn to sit. "Legends tell of a flame, a magical fire that can thaw even the iciest of hearts. It lies within the sacred glade, a place shrouded in mystery and guarded by ancient spirits. Many have tried to find it, but none have returned." Finn felt a rush of determination surge within him. "I will go to the sacred glade. I will find the flame and confront Ilara." His voice rang with conviction, though doubt lingered in the corners of his mind. Agatha studied him for a moment, her gaze penetrating and wise. "If you choose this path, Finn, know that you will face trials that will test your very essence. But should you succeed, the warmth of that flame may not only save your kingdom, but also bring light to the darkness within Ilara." With those words echoing in his mind, Finn stepped into the night, the weight of his decision heavy on his shoulders. The stars glimmered above, each one a silent witness to his resolve. He felt the cold air biting at his skin, but the fire in his heart burned brighter than ever. With a deep breath, he set forth into the night, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The journey to the sacred glade awaited, and with it, the hope of thawing not just Ilara's frozen heart, but the hearts of all who suffered in the shadow of her curse. The cold night wrapped itself around Finn like a shroud as he ventured deeper into the forest. The trees, once familiar and welcoming, now seemed to loom overhead like silent sentinels of an ancient secret. Their branches stretched out like gnarled hands, and the wind that whistled through them carried whispers, words Finn could not quite understand, though he felt them stir something deep within him. Eldenwood had always been surrounded by these woods, but no one dared to stray too far. Stories of strange enchantments and mischievous spirits kept the villagers away. Yet now, As Finn stepped further from the village, the trees began to change, their bark shimmering with a faint, otherworldly glow. The air felt thick, alive with a magic older than time itself. Finn's breath fogged before him as he followed a path that seemed to appear beneath his feet, winding deeper into the enchanted forest. His heart pounded, not just from the cold, but from the weight of his task. The village elder's words rang in his mind. The sacred glade, a place shrouded in mystery and guarded by ancient spirits. It was the only place where he could find the enchanted flame. But reaching it would not be easy. Few had ventured this way, and none had returned. The trees whispered more urgently now, their voices rising in a chorus of warnings. But Finn pressed on, his resolve as solid as the ground beneath him. He clutched his cloak tighter around him, its warmth offering little comfort against the cold that seemed to seep not just into his skin, but into his very bones. Suddenly, the path before him vanished, dissolving into an expanse of darkness. Finn hesitated, his pulse quickening. The forest, which had been eerily silent, now seemed to hold its breath. He could feel it, a presence, watching him, testing him. He took a cautious step forward, and the moment his foot touched the ground, the world around him shifted. A figure appeared out of the mist, tall and cloaked in shadow. Its eyes gleamed like embers, flickering with an ancient fire. Finn's heart leapt to his throat, but he stood his ground. The figure said nothing, yet its presence radiated power, a silent challenge. "I've come for the flame," Finn said, his voice steady, despite the fear gnawing at him. "I need it to save my kingdom." The figure tilted its head, the faint glow of its eyes narrowing. When it spoke, its voice was a low crackling whisper, like the sound of a fire about to burn out. "The flame is not easily given. It must be earned." Finn swallowed hard. He had expected a test, but now that it was before him, the enormity of his quest struck him. "What must I do?" The figure gestured to the darkness around them. "Prove yourself worthy. Show me the strength of your heart, or turn back and abandon hope." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Finn wondered if the figure would vanish, leaving him alone in the cold. But then, without warning, the ground beneath his feet rumbled. The darkness before him shifted and split, revealing a chasm deep and wide, filled with swirling mist. On the other side, barely visible, a single flame flickered, small but brilliant against the endless black. Finn took a step closer, peering into the abyss. He could feel the pull of the void, its cold tendrils wrapping around his ankles, whispering doubts into his ears. The gap was wide, too wide to jump, and the mist swirled with unknown dangers. But the flame, it was there, just out of reach, and it was the only thing that could melt Ilara's heart of ice. For a moment, Finn wavered, fear threatening to root him to the spot. But then he remembered the faces of his fellow villagers, their eyes dull with despair, their hopes frozen like the land around them. He couldn't fail them. He wouldn't. With a deep breath, Finn took a running start and leapt into the void. The wind howled around him as he sailed through the air, the cold biting at his skin. Time seemed to slow, and in the silence, Finn's heart beat loud in his ears. For a terrifying second he thought he would fall, plunge into the depths of the chasm and be lost forever. But his feet touched solid ground. He stumbled, breathless, onto the other side. The flame flickered before him, small but impossibly bright. He reached out, and as his fingers brushed its warmth, a surge of energy flowed through him, banishing the cold that had plagued him since he entered the forest. The flame pulsed once, twice, then settled into a steady, calming glow. "You have the flame," the figure's voice echoed from across the chasm. "But remember, boy, fire can warm, or it can burn. Use it wisely, for your journey has only just begun." Finn nodded, his eyes fixed on the flame in his hand, its light casting long shadows in the surrounding darkness. He had what he needed, but the true challenge facing Alara still lay ahead. The forest seemed to part before him as he turned back towards Eldenwood, the enchanted flame burning brightly in his grasp, and with it, the hope of an entire kingdom. The path ahead of Finn twisted and turned, vanishing into the gloom of the enchanted forest. The flame in his hand flickered softly, casting a warm glow, but its light was swallowed by the shadows almost as quickly as it was born. The forest had grown stranger since he claimed the flame. The air hummed with magic. The trees seemed to shift, their branches reaching out like clawed fingers, and the ground beneath him felt as if it might give way at any moment. Finn walked cautiously, his senses heightened by the eerie stillness. Every rustle of leaves, every distant cry of some unseen creature set his heart racing. It was as though the very forest was testing him, watching his every move with eyes he could not see but could feel. He could not afford to fail. Not now, not with the flame in his grasp. The weight of his task pressed heavily upon him. As he ventured deeper, a thick mist began to rise from the ground, curling around his legs and creeping up to his waist. It was cold, far colder than the air around him, and it seemed to sap the warmth from his body. The flame in his hand sputtered, its light dimming as if the mist itself was trying to smother it. Finn quickened his pace, but the mist only grew denser, its grip tighter. Then, from the depths of the fog, a soft voice floated to him, distant and melodic. "Lost are you, little one?" Finn froze. The voice was sweet, almost too sweet, and carried a note of amusement, as if its owner found his struggle entertaining. He glanced around, but the mist was too thick. He could see nothing beyond the tendrils that clung to him. "I know what you seek," the voice continued, closer now, yet still disembodied. "The flame in your hand. It It's a fragile thing, isn't it? So easy to extinguish, so vulnerable in this cold. Finn's heart raced. He tightened his grip on the flame, holding it close to his chest. "Show yourself," he called into the mist, trying to sound braver than he felt. A figure slowly emerged from the swirling fog. A fox, sleek and silver, with eyes that gleamed like the moon. It moved with an unsettling grace, circling Finn as it spoke, its voice smooth and beguiling. "Why such haste, boy?" the fox said, its tail flicking through the mist. "You carry something precious, but are you sure you can protect it? Many have come this way, holding flames just like yours, and none have left the forest alive." Finn's throat tightened, but he stood his ground. "I will protect it," he said, the conviction in his voice wavering slightly. "I must. It's the only way to save my kingdom." The fox paused, its eyes narrowing with interest. "Oh, a kingdom, is it? How noble. But you see, the forest plays its own game. If you wish to pass, you must answer its riddle." "A riddle?" Finn echoed, suspicion creeping into his mind. The flame flickered again in his hand, casting long, wavering shadows. "What sort of riddle?" The fox's grin widened, its teeth flashing in the dim light. "A simple one, but a riddle nonetheless. Answer truthfully, and the mist will part. Fail, and, well, let's just say the forest will have its price." Finn swallowed hard. He could feel the cold closing in around him, the mist tightening like a noose. There was no turning back. "Tell me the riddle," he said, his voice steady. The fox's eyes gleamed. "Very well. Listen closely, boy." It began to pace around him, its voice low and hypnotic. "To keep me is to lose me, but once I am lost, you cannot find me. What am I?" The riddle hung in the air, twisting through Finn's mind like the mist around him. He frowned, turning the words over and over, trying to grasp their meaning. To keep me is to lose me, but once I am lost. His thoughts raced, but time seemed to slip away, the mist pressing in closer. The fox watched him with expectant eyes, its smile never faltering. Finn closed his eyes for a moment, focusing. The answer came to him like a whisper. "Time," he said softly, opening his eyes to meet the fox's gaze. "You are time." The fox stopped its pacing, its smile fading into something more thoughtful. "Clever boy," it said, its voice quieter now. "Very clever. You may pass." With a flick of its tail, the mist began to dissipate, retreating into the shadows from which it had come. The path before Finn cleared, and the cold that had gripped his body loosened its hold. The flame in his hand flared brightly once more, warming him from within. The fox turned, its silver form disappearing into the forest. "Be warned," it called over its shoulder, its voice now distant and echoing. "The trials ahead are far more treacherous than my riddle." Finn watched as the fox vanished, leaving him alone once more. He took a deep breath, his heart still pounding, but his resolve firm. The flame in his hand was stronger now, its light a beacon in the darkness. He had passed the fox's test, but the forest was far from done with him. He pressed on, his mind turning to the witch who waited at the end of this journey. Her heart of ice colder than the mist that had nearly claimed him. Whatever trials lay ahead, Finn knew he had no choice but to face them, no matter the cost. The path through the forest stretched ever onward, but the trees no longer pressed in so tightly. Their branches arched above like the ribs of some ancient creature frozen in time, while patches of moonlight flickered down through the gaps, casting strange, dancing patterns on the ground. Finn's steps, though cautious, were driven by an inner fire that matched the magical flame he carried. The warmth of the flame radiated through his hand, its soft glow a beacon of hope against the cold darkness of the enchanted forest. At last, the forest began to thin, and before him, a shimmering light appeared. It flickered in and out of focus, as though it belonged to another realm entirely. Finn's heart quickened. This had to be the sacred glade. He stepped forward, his breath catching in his throat as the trees opened into a wide clearing, bathed in the silvery light of the moon. In the center of the glade stood a towering figure of flame, its form ever shifting, sometimes a towering inferno, other times a delicate wisp. It was neither man nor beast, yet something about it radiated both power and ancient wisdom. Its eyes were two molten orbs that glowed like embers from the heart of a long-forgotten fire. Finn approached cautiously, the warmth of the figure's presence almost overwhelming. He could feel its gaze on him, burning with an intensity that seemed to peer into the very core of his being. This, he knew, was Ember, the spirit that guarded the flame. "You seek the flame to melt the frozen heart," the spirit said, its voice crackling like wood in a fire. "But are you worthy of it, boy? Many have come here before you, driven by desperation, and all have failed." Finn's grip tightened on the flame in his hand. He could feel its warmth pulsing, as if it recognized its source in Ember. "I don't know if I'm worthy," he admitted, his voice steady but low. "But I have to try. My kingdom is dying, frozen by the witch's curse. The flame is the only way to save it." Ember circled him slowly, its fiery form casting long shadows across the glade. "Courage alone will not be enough," it said. "The flame can burn as easily as it can warm. It is a force that requires understanding, control. Without that, it can destroy just as quickly as it can save." Finn nodded, though doubt tugged at the edges of his mind. The path ahead seemed more perilous now than ever, but he couldn't turn back. "I will do whatever it takes," he said, meeting Ember's gaze. "I won't let it fall into darkness." The flame spirit paused, as though weighing his words. "Then you will be tested, not just in body but in spirit, it said. For the heart you seek to melt is frozen by sorrow, not by malice. It will take more than fire to thaw it. You must carry the flame with wisdom and compassion, or you will fail as those before you. Finn swallowed, the weight of Ember's words heavy in the air. I understand, he said softly, though he wasn't sure if he truly did. How could he melt the heart of someone as powerful and as broken as Ilara? Ember's fiery form shifted again, and suddenly the entire glade was alive with the flicker of countless flames, each one dancing and swaying to an invisible rhythm. Hold out your hand, the spirit commanded. Finn obeyed, extending his hand with the magical flame still burning in his palm. Ember reached forward, its molten eyes glowing brighter, and touched the flame in Finn's hand. For a moment, the fire surged, flaring up in a brilliant burst of light and heat, threatening to consume him. Finn gasped, feeling its intensity course through him, but he did not flinch. And then, just as suddenly, the flame settled. It burned brighter now, but its warmth was no longer overwhelming. It was controlled, gentle, as though Finn had become one with its power. You carry the flame now as its true bearer, Ember said, stepping back. But remember, this flame is more than a weapon. It is a light that can guide, a warmth that can heal. Use it wisely, or you will lose everything you seek to protect. Finn nodded, the weight of the flame heavy in his hand, but its warmth filling him with renewed strength. Thank you, he whispered, though he wasn't sure if Ember could hear him. The spirit's fiery form had already begun to fade, dissolving into the air like smoke carried away by the wind. The sacred glade grew still once more, the shimmering light of the flames now gone, leaving Finn alone beneath the wide, silent sky. He looked down at the flame in his hand, its steady glow lighting the path ahead. The trials he had faced so far had only brought him closer to his goal, but the true test, the one that would determine the fate of his kingdom, still lay ahead. With the flame now burning brighter than before, Finn took a deep breath and turned back toward the path, ready to face the icy heart of the witch, Ilara. The forest, though still dark and shadowed, no longer felt as ominous. The flame would guide him, just as Ember had said, and with it, the hope of melting the frozen heart and ending the eternal winter grew stronger with each step. Finn stood at the edge of the forest, where the land began to change. The air grew colder, sharper, as though it carried the bite of a storm that never ended. Before him loomed the witch's fortress, Elara's lair, an immense castle of ice and shadow that jutted from the earth like a frozen scar. Its walls glistened with frost, every towering spire wrapped in a perpetual shroud of cold mist. The very air around it seemed to hum with an unnatural chill, a warning to all who dared approach. But Finn did not falter. The magical flame in his hand burned brighter against the darkness, its warmth spreading through his body, giving him strength. Every step toward the fortress felt heavier, the cold gnawing at his skin and bones, but the flame remained steady, a beacon of hope in the heart of winter's dominion. As he reached the gates of the fortress, they groaned open with a sound like cracking ice. Beyond them lay a courtyard, desolate and still, the ground slick with frost. The wind howled through the broken archways, and Finn could feel eyes, unseen but unmistakable, watching him from every corner. In the center of the courtyard stood a figure, tall and cloaked in a robe of shimmering frost. Her presence dominated the space, cold and commanding, as though she herself had risen from the very heart of winter. Elara, the witch whose heart was made of ice. Finn hesitated for only a moment, but then he stepped forward, the flame in his hand flickering defiantly in the face of her power. "Elara!" he called, his voice echoing through the frozen air. "I've come to end this winter." The witch turned slowly, her face pale as the moon, her eyes glittering with cold fire. Her beauty was otherworldly, but there was something terrifying in it, a sharpness that cut deeper than any blade. Her gaze fell on Finn, and she regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "You," she said, her voice soft, but carrying the weight of the storm itself. "A mere boy, carrying a feeble flame, thinks he can challenge me." She laughed, a sound that cracked like ice breaking beneath heavy boots. "You are brave, but foolish." Finn's heart pounded, but he stood his ground. "This flame is not weak. It has the power to melt even the coldest heart." Elara's eyes narrowed. "The flame is powerful, yes," she said, her voice colder now, more dangerous. "But my heart is not merely frozen. It is bound by sorrow, by loss that you cannot comprehend. No flame can change that. You would do well to turn back now, before you are consumed by the cold." The words struck Finn like shards of ice, but he did not waver. "I know you've suffered," he said, his voice softer now, though still firm. "But freezing the world in your pain won't heal what's broken. I can help you, if you let me." Elara's gaze darkened, and for a moment, Finn thought he saw a flicker of something, pain, perhaps, or longing, deep within her eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She raised her hand, and the air around them began to swirl, the wind whipping into a violent storm. Snow whirled around Finn, stinging his skin like needles, and the cold deepened, pressing in on him from every side. "You think you can understand my pain?" Elara's voice rose above the storm, sharp and bitter. "You are nothing, boy. Nothing but warmth waiting to be extinguished." The storm grew fiercer, and Finn felt the cold creeping toward his heart, the weight of it dragging him down. He clutched the flame tighter, its warmth the only thing keeping him from being swallowed by the frost. The wind howled, and the snow closed in, thick and blinding. But amid the chaos, Finn's thoughts remained clear. He couldn't fight Elara with anger or fear. She was already consumed by those things. The flame was more than a weapon. It was a light, a symbol of hope. And hope could melt even the deepest sorrow. Elara! Finn's voice cut through the storm, and for a brief moment, the wind slowed. This flame isn't just fire, it's warmth, it's life. You don't have to be alone in the cold anymore. Elara's hand faltered, the storm pausing as if caught between her will and the power of Finn's words. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time, her icy composure cracked. Beneath the frost, Finn saw a woman, tired, broken, and lost. You don't have to freeze the world to stop the pain, Finn said, stepping forward through the swirling snow. Let the flame melt the ice around your heart. The wind fell to a whisper. The snow settled. Elara's eyes, wide with something like disbelief, locked on the flame in Finn's hand. For a moment, time itself seemed to still, the frozen air waiting to see what would come next. And then with a trembling hand, Elara reached towards the flame, her fingers brushing the warmth. A tear, small, glimmering like the finest crystal, slipped down her cheek, and as it fell, the ice began to melt. The storm quieted, and the courtyard grew still. The flame in Finn's hand burned steady, its light casting long, warm shadows across the icy ground. Elara's heart, once frozen in sorrow, had begun to thaw. But the true test was yet to come. The world around Finn seemed to hold its breath as Elara's fingers hovered near the flame. The cold that had pressed so tightly against him moments before began to ease. But the air was still thick with tension, as though the entire kingdom waited for what would happen next. The witch's pale face was illuminated by the soft glow of the flame, her eyes wide and conflicted. There was a shadow of something deeper, something hidden beneath the layers of ice that encased her heart. Finn could feel it, a pulse of sorrow that rippled through the cold, whispering of a story long buried beneath winter's chill. You think this flame can melt my heart? Elara's voice was barely a breath, her eyes flickering between the warmth in Finn's hand and the distant memories that clouded her gaze. Do you think it can undo what has been frozen for so long? Finn's heart raced. The flame in his hand flickered, casting long, wavering shadows across the courtyard. It's not just the flame, Elara, he said, his voice soft but sure. It's you. You have to let it in. You have to believe that warmth, that kindness, can still exist in this world. Elara's hand trembled as she reached closer to the flame, the ice at her fingertips already beginning to thaw. I once believed in warmth, she whispered, her voice fragile as frost. But that was before everything was taken from me. Her words hung in the air, a sharp and bitter truth. Finn could feel the weight of her sorrow, the cold of her heart not born of malice, but of deep, unhealed wounds. He stepped closer carefully, not wanting to startle the fragile moment. "What happened, Elara? What made your heart freeze like this?" Elara hesitated, her eyes dark with memories she had tried to forget. For a moment, Finn thought she would turn away, retreat back into the safety of her icy fortress. But something in the flame, in the boy standing before her, seemed to break through the wall of frost that had shielded her for so long. "I was once like you," she began, her voice distant, as though speaking from a place far removed from the present. "I knew the warmth of love, the brightness of hope, but winter took everything from me. My family, my home, everything I cherished, buried beneath snow and ice. I thought I could survive the cold, that I could protect myself by embracing it. But it consumed me instead." Her eyes, shimmering with unshed tears, met Finn's. "I froze my own heart to keep it from breaking. But now, I don't know how to make it thaw." Finn's chest tightened at the sorrow in her voice. The cold was no longer the enemy. It was her shield, her defense against a world that had hurt her too deeply. "You don't have to fight the cold anymore," Finn said, stepping closer still. "You don't have to freeze the world to protect yourself. Let the warmth in, Elara. Let it heal what's been broken." Elara's gaze lingered on the flame, her hand now inches from its warmth. For a moment, she seemed lost in thought, torn between the ice that had defined her for so long and the fragile hope that flickered before her. Then, with a trembling breath, she touched the flame. The effect was immediate. A shudder ran through Elara's body, and the ice that clung to her robes, her skin began to crack and melt. The courtyard, once so still and cold, seemed to tremble with the force of it. Snow began to fall gently from the towers of her fortress. But this time, it wasn't sharp or biting. It was soft, like the first snowfall of winter, full of wonder rather than malice. Elara gasped, her hand still resting in the warmth of the flame. It's melting," she whispered, her voice full of disbelief. "I can feel it." Finn watched, his heart pounding as the ice around her heart began to thaw, the sharp edges softening, the cold giving way to something deeper, something vulnerable and alive. "You can be whole again," he said, his voice low and steady. "You don't have to freeze the world to keep it at bay." Tears slipped down Elara's cheeks, and as they fell, they turned to water rather than ice. The storm in her eyes quieted, the endless winter that had raged within her for so long beginning to calm. But the journey wasn't over yet. Finn knew that the last vestiges of her sorrow would not be so easily swept away. I don't know how to be anything other than this," Elara whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to let go of the cold." Finn looked at her, the flame still burning brightly between them. You don't have to let go of it all at once. Just take the first step. One small spark is all it takes to light a fire. The witch stared at him, her face softening as the last of the frost around her heart began to melt. The storm that had raged so fiercely around her fortress fell silent, and the cold that had gripped the land began to release its hold. But even as the warmth spread, Finn knew there was still one final test, one last moment, where everything could either be saved or lost. For a heartbeat, all was still. The flame flickered softly in Finn's hand, casting a gentle glow across the courtyard, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would come of this fragile moment. Ilara stood motionless, her pale fingers brushing against the warmth, her eyes distant and uncertain. The ice that had encased her heart for so long was beginning to melt, but Finn could sense the tension within her. A final battle waged deep inside, between the desire to let go and the fear of what might come after. The snow around them had softened, no longer a storm, but a gentle cascade of white, as though even winter itself was unsure of its place in this new, shifting reality. Ilara's voice was barely a whisper, but it echoed in the stillness. I don't know how to feel warmth again. I have been cold for so long that I don't know if I can be anything else. Finn took a careful step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. You can, he said softly, the flame's light casting shadows that danced across the frost-covered stones. You're not alone anymore, Ilara. The world doesn't have to be frozen. It doesn't have to be pain and loss forever. Her gaze flickered, something fragile and uncertain in the depths of her icy blue eyes. But what if the warmth burns? She asked, her voice tinged with a vulnerability that made Finn's heart ache. What if it destroys what's left of me? The question hung in the air, trembling on the edge of a deeper truth. Finn understood then. This wasn't just about melting ice or lifting the curse. It was about trust, about facing the unknown, about believing that something more could exist beyond the walls she had built around her heart. The warmth won't destroy you, Finn replied gently. It will heal you, but you have to let it in. You have to trust it. For a long moment, Ilara said nothing, her fingers still hovering just above the flame. Finn could see the internal struggle etched across her face. The fear, the doubt, the hope. And then, in a movement so subtle it was almost imperceptible, she took a deep breath and closed her hand around the flame. A brilliant surge of light erupted from between her fingers, as though the flame had been waiting for this moment. It spread through her body like wildfire, and Finn watched in awe as the frost that had clung to her robes, her skin, began to melt in rivulets of water. Her silver hair, once stiff with ice, flowed like a river of moonlight, and her pale skin glowed with the soft warmth of life returning. Ilara gasped a sound full of wonder and disbelief. Her eyes, wide with emotion, glistened with tears that no longer froze upon her cheeks. The ice that had cased her heart for so long was breaking apart, piece by piece, as the warmth of the flame spread through her, filling the cracks that had once been so deep. But even as the thaw took hold, Finn knew the final test was upon them. The flame's magic had done its part, but the true healing, the final release from the curse, was up to Alara herself. She had to embrace the warmth, let it fully into her heart, or risk falling back into the cold. For a moment, she faltered, her expression flickering with uncertainty. "I don't know how to let go," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know if I can." Finn reached out, his hand warm and steady. "You don't have to know how," he said softly. "You just have to believe it's possible." Alara's gaze locked with his, and for a long, trembling moment, the world around them seemed to still. Then slowly she took his hand, the last of the ice melting beneath her touch. The warmth that had begun as a flicker of flame blossomed into something deeper, something more powerful. And Finn could feel it. The weight of centuries of cold, of sorrow, of loss, beginning to lift. The fortress around them, once a monument to winter's rain, began to change. The icy wall shimmered, melting into a cascade of water that flowed into the earth, nourishing the frozen ground beneath their feet. Flowers, long dormant under the frost, began to bloom in vibrant colors, their petals soft and alive. The air, once thick with cold, grew warmer, filled with the scent of spring. Alara's eyes filled with tears, real tears, warm and human. She let go of Finn's hand and placed her own over her heart, as though feeling its beat for the first time in centuries. "It's gone," she whispered, her voice full of wonder. "The cold, it's finally gone." Finn smiled, his heart swelling with relief and hope. The witch's heart had melted, and with it, the curse that had bound the kingdom in eternal winter was lifted. But even as the warmth spread, even as the flowers bloomed and the ice melted away, Finn knew that this was only the beginning. Alara had taken the first step, but the road to healing was long. The flame had melted her heart, but it would take time for her to fully embrace the warmth of life once more. And yet, in that moment, standing amidst the ruins of her icy fortress, with the world blooming around them, Finn knew that anything was possible. The final step was hers to take. The transformation of Alara's frozen fortress was nothing short of miraculous. The ice, once an unyielding barrier that encased the land, now melted into a river of clear water, flowing freely across the courtyard, where it soaked into the earth, awakening the long-forgotten soil beneath. What had once been a domain of winter's cruel rain now began to bloom with the first signs of spring. Delicate buds pushing through the frost. Tender, green shoots, stretching toward the pale sky. It was as if the world itself was taking a breath after a long and terrible silence. Elara stood in the center of it all, her hand still pressed to her chest, her eyes wide with the realization that the ice, the cold that had gripped her heart for so many years, was finally gone. For the first time in what felt like lifetimes, she felt warmth spreading through her, fragile, uncertain, but real. Her once silver hair, brittle as frost, now shone like spun moonlight, soft and full of life. The cold fire that had burned in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by something gentler, something human. Finn watched her in silence, the flame in his hand still glowing, though its task was complete. The wind, once sharp and biting, now carried the scent of earth and flowers, the promise of new beginnings woven into every breath. He felt the tension of the long journey finally slip away from his shoulders, replaced by a quiet sense of triumph. The kingdom was no longer trapped in winter's endless grip. The thaw had begun. But as Finn stood there, the last echoes of the storm fading into memory, he could see the uncertainty still flickering in Elara's gaze. She had lived so long in the cold, so long with her heart frozen, that the warmth, though it had melted the ice, felt foreign, unsettling. She turned to Finn, her voice soft, barely audible against the quiet murmur of the awakening world. "What happens now?" she asked, her words fragile, as if she feared the warmth might disappear as quickly as it had come. "I've lived in the cold for so long. I don't know how to exist in the light." Finn took a slow breath, meeting her gaze with a calm assurance. "Now," he said, his voice steady and warm, "you heal. You've already taken the hardest step, letting the warmth in. The rest will come with time." Elara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and she looked around her as if seeing the world for the first time. The fortress, once a prison of ice and sorrow, was now a place of beauty, of renewal. The flowers that bloomed at her feet, the trees that began to stir with life, all were testaments to the power of change, of hope returning to a land long forgotten by the sun. "But how do I make amends for the cold I've brought upon this kingdom?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "How do I undo the harm I've caused?" Finn smiled, a soft, reassuring smile. "You've already begun. The ice has melted, and life is returning to the land. But you don't have to carry this burden alone, Elara. The people, they will forgive. They will understand. It may take time, but they'll see the change in you, just as I have." Elara looked at him, her expression one of quiet disbelief, as though she still couldn't quite accept that such a thing was possible. But the hope in her eyes was growing, fragile though it was. The sun, which had long been a distant and forgotten memory, began to break through the clouds, its light spilling over the horizon in a soft golden glow. The warmth it brought was different from the flame in Finn's hand. It was the warmth of a new beginning, a world reborn from the cold. Finn turned toward the rising sun, his heart filled with a quiet sense of peace. "The kingdom will heal, just as you will," he said, his voice full of certainty. "Winter may have taken much, but spring has returned, and with it, there is hope." Elara stood beside him, her face bathed in the golden light of dawn. The ice within her had melted, but the journey of healing had only just begun. She would learn, in time, to live in the warmth, to let go of the sorrow that had once defined her. But for now, standing in the gentle light of the new day, she felt something stir within her. A spark, small but growing, of hope. The kingdom too would flourish again. The rivers would flow, the fields would bloom, and the people would remember that even in the darkest winter, the promise of spring remained. Finn looked down at the flame in his hand, its light now fading, its work complete. With a soft breath, he let it go, and it vanished into the air, a spark carried away on the wind. Elara glanced at him, a small, hesitant smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Thank you," she whispered, the words carrying the weight of her gratitude, her newfound hope. Finn nodded, his heart light. "The kingdom is yours to protect now, Elara. Just remember, there's always warmth, even in the coldest hearts." And with that, as the first light of day spread across the land, they stood together, watching as the world, once frozen in sorrow, began to bloom anew. The winter had ended, spring had come,